Welcome, everybody. My name is Kiefer Huff. Today, we are just going to discuss the principles of strength training. And the idea of today isn't to discuss every single thing about strength training. That would be impossible. It can be a masterclass in itself and can go on for hours and hours. But the idea is to give you enough knowledge so that you can create your own strength training program. A quick disclaimer to the idea that there is a specific way that you must train or a specific way that you must program. That isn't true. There is all sorts of different ways that you can program your training to get you the best optimal results. What I'm simply doing here is trying to expose you to all sorts of different methods that you can utilize in your training to optimize it. And I don't want this to come across as this is the right way, but just a variety of ways and things that you can use. Our first topic is going to be the three important concepts to any sort of training, really, with intensity, volume, and frequency being at the forefront. Intensity is, think about it, how difficult is the exercise? How much weight is on the bar? And how much effort are you putting into it? Volume being is how much are you doing? And this is often calculated by sets, reps, times weight. So looking at those three aspects, and this is kind of how you can get an idea of how much volume you're doing per week. And frequency is just how many training sessions are you doing per week? Saying if you lift 5 times a week, that's a frequency of 5 times per week. If you lift 3 times a week, that's a frequency of 3 times a week. So these are the three important concepts that we're going to be discussing and how these ones are going to influence your training. That's where we have the three important concepts and how does it relate to you. All of them are related. When one goes up, the others have to go down. So this is an inverse relationship between the three of them. When intensity goes up, volume has to go down. When frequency goes up, all the others have to go down. As you see the inverse relationship, or y, whenever y is high up there, it's going to be lower on the x-axis. So y is going to be, let's say, intensity. So intensity, when it is high, x being volume has to be low. And then the reverse, opposite. So when volume is high, intensity has to be low. Very quickly, you can see how these three variables in training are going to be very important. Say you're going for some heavy squats, right? You're going for reps of 3, sets of 3. The volume is going to be low. That's not a whole lot of volume you're doing there, and you're not going to be able to do that a lot during the week. So the frequency is going to be low. Overall, that intensity, when it goes up, volume and frequency have to be lower. And you can kind of reverse that. Say you're going for 20 reps of squats. If you're doing 20 rep sets on squats, your intensity is going to be low. You're not going to be able to have as much weight on the bar as compared if you're doing 3 reps. So very quickly, you'll see how important these three are going to be when you design your own program. If you're trying to do 20 sets of 20 with an extremely high intensity on some sort of exercise, the volume, frequency, and the intensity, all three of those can't be up that high, and you're going to be very sore after those sessions, and you're not going to be able to give yourself the optimal stimulus. Intensity matters. Intensity, in my opinion, is the most important aspect to training. And there's a couple of reasons why, because without intensity, you're not going to provide your body with an adequate stimulus. I talk a lot about the specific adaptation imposed demands, which basically gives you the principle that whatever demands you're putting on the body, it will adapt to. So if you're not giving yourself that adequate stimulus that your body needs to adapt and get stronger, it will not do that. Although I think intensity is the most important, there is a such thing as too much intensity. It'll be bad for you because you won't be able to recover from those sessions. Giving yourself the optimal stimulus is a cat and mouse game. There's a fine line between too much intensity and not enough intensity. So that's something you're just going to have to experiment with on yourself in your own training sessions to decide what's going to be the most intensity that I can train with and still recover from and get the best results. And so one of the best ways to determine what your intensity is what we call an RPE scale. RPE being from 0 all the way up to 10. 0, I would like to think of RPE as it's not very difficult. You could probably finish up another 10 reps after your last rep. And then RPE 10 is going to be the highest RPE. This is going to be a maximal effort lift. If you were to try one more rep after that rep you just made at RPE 10, you will not get it. That is how difficult an RPE 10 is. So then we drop it down to like an RPE 6, right? And you just split the difference from 6 to 10. Say you get to your last rep at an RPE 6, you should be able to do 3 to 4 more reps. And so that's still a pretty difficult intensity, but it's not something that's going to increase your recovery so far that you won't be able to recover from a set like that. Here's a squat that I did. I would consider this at an RPE 9 to 10. A very difficult squat. I don't know if I would have been able to squeeze one more out. A deadlift that I did, probably an RPE 10 there. I don't think I could squeeze one more rep out after that. And so that's what you're kind of looking for. It has to be difficult. It has to be something that is extremely challenging for you when it comes to that higher RPE range. You're probably asking, What's the optimal RPE that I should use during a set? If I were to recommend a general recommendation, it's going to be that RPE 6 to 8. RPE 6 to 8 will be challenging, and it's something that you can maintain. Trying to train every set at a RPE 10 will not work, and trying to train every set at a RPE 3 will not give you the best results. With that being said, too much intensity bad, too little intensity bad. Let's move on to our next topic, volume and frequency. I find volume and frequency being important when you're trying to improve your technique or neuromotor coordination with specific movements that require a higher degree of technique proficiency. You can also increase volume and frequency if you're trying to hit a specific muscle group much more during a week. Throwing more volume at the quads will usually lead to more strength development and more overall size development as well. And then more frequency on a specific muscle group can also do that as well. And so you're going to use these movements on technical movements like a snatch, a clean and jerk, a deadlift, a back squat. And the reason why you're doing these things is because when it comes to those very technical lifts that have those very minute details, you want to spend a lot of time perfecting your technique and building those motor patterns. So when you get under heavy weight, like myself here in a clean and jerk, you don't really have to think about your technique so much. And even with a snatch, very technical lift, you have to perform a lot of sets and reps before you get very, very good at performing those movements. So that's one reason why you'd probably want to increase your volume and your frequency of certain movements so that you could just build that technique and build those motor patterns to perform under heavy weights. So what's the most optimal volume and frequency to use? That's a very tough question. And there's no 100% answer that is going to give you the best results every single time. So here's where you can start. An optimal start will be 2 to 3 exercises per muscle group. So say you're wanting to hit chest and triceps, bench press, cable crossover, and push up. With 2 to 3 to 4 sets per exercise. So say bench press is 3 sets of 8 reps. Then the cable crossover is 3 sets of 12, and then you finish on push-ups at 3 sets of 10. And then an example of times per week for frequency, say 3 to 5 times a week. Say, you're pretty busy, you don't have all that much time. So day 1, you're going to hit a lower body leg exercise. Day 2, it's going to be upper body. And then day 3 is going to be a full body day. As a beginner, I urge you not to get too caught up in all this volume and frequency stuff. Pick something and be consistent with it, and then have an adequate intensity that's challenging enough for you, and you will make progress. Our next topic is hypertrophy, strength, power, and endurance training. All 4 of these are different, but they all have relations to one another. There's no line in the sand between the 4, and they all kind of fall over into each category themselves as you start to train in the ranges between one another. Hypertrophy is going to be the growth of a muscle. Often there are a few mechanics that require the muscle to grow. Some of the mechanics that we have here, one is if the muscle is required to produce more force for the demands placed on it. So if you're lifting adequately, your intensity is high enough, and you're requiring the muscle to produce more force, you're going to be giving it that stimulus that it needs to grow over time. Another one is time under tension. It's been often shown that the more tension that you place on the muscle and the more time that it spends under that tension, the more signaling that muscle is going to get that it needs to grow, that it needs to get bigger. Other ones that we have are metabolites and cell swelling. Often sometimes cells in the muscle will increase in size under training. And then there's also metabolites that get left over in the muscle that will signal that the muscles need to be grown. Although the exact mechanisms are not fully understood for all these components, it's what's the most promising in today's research. So I think the most useful application from these are going to be time under tension and placing the demands on the muscle that it needs to grow. So kind of going back to that intensity aspect, one of the most important ones that I think, make sure the intensity is high and that the muscle needs to grow. Hypertrophy goes hand in hand with strength, power, and endurance. One of the ways that it goes hand in hand is because when you have more muscle and you have more what we call sarcomere in a line, you're going to be able to produce more force. The more muscle you have, more force you can produce. Thus, your strength is going to go up. Your power will be increasing as well because power is a product of force times velocity. You create more force, you can create more power. And the same with endurance. The more muscle you have, the more endurance you will be able to develop and you'll be able to train to use. Strength, my favorite way to train. So strength is going to be increased force production and increased motor unit recruitment. Motor units are what innervates specific muscle fibers. And the more motor units you can recruit, the more force is going to be produced. So this kind of training will go hand in hand with hypertrophy training for the same reason that we just talked about previously. And strength training needs to be around that 70 to 100% of your max capacity, or 70 to 100% of your 1 rep max. In order to increase strength, you must lift weights that are difficult and closer to your maximum lifting capacity. So at the end of the day, with strength training, there is a risk for injury, but the benefits far outweigh the cons. I personally like to use large compound barbell movements for strength training. That's going to help you build that overall strength. Things like a push press here, things like a front squatted too. Absolutely great for lower leg development and increasing your strength. Power. This is all about moving weights fast and with all of your effort. Okay, so power is going to be force times velocity. So think about moving something very quickly and with all the force that you have. These percentages here are going to be around that 40 to 70% of your 1 rep max. And the reason being is because once you get up above about the 70%, the ability for you to move the weight is decreased. As the weight gets heavier, you tend to not be able to move weight as fast. Now you can start to see the overlap between power and strength. As power will start to decrease, you start to get into a little more of that strength aspect. And this number can go higher depending on the specific lift and how experienced you are at that lift. Oftentimes, there's a lot more power to be able to be produced with 100% maximal snatch as compared to 100% maximal snatch deadlift from the floor. The snatch deadlift is going to be much heavier as compared to the snatch. So as you can see, this is a video of some squats here. Now these squats here are around, I would say, 50 to 55% of my best. And as you can see, the weight is moving very quickly. I'm putting all the effort that I have into the squat. So this is generally about how fast the weights need to be moving whenever you're trying to perform your exercises for power development. Endurance is a very overlooked aspect when it comes to strength training. Without a strong endurance-based ability to partake in those long, intense strength training sessions, it won't be possible. So at the beginning of your training blocks, I like to recommend having higher rep ranges, more sets, so you can really work on building that endurance so that you have the ability to manage all that intense training, especially once you get towards the end of your training block. Like I said, endurance is very overlooked. It's something that's very important. It's something that you're going to need when it comes to strength training and power building. I like to do higher rep ranges, the sets of 10 to 20 reps, things of that nature. And keeping your heart rate up is another big aspect to it. So sometimes you don't need those high reps when you're performing big compound movements like squats or deadlifts to get that high of a heart rate. Somewhere in the heart rate of around like 70 to 80% of your max heart rate is going to be very beneficial when it comes to increasing that endurance and your heart's ability to pump the blood to the body and to help get out those metabolites that you'll have during exercise so that you'll be able to perform for longer periods of time. Sets and rep ranges. Looking at 1 to 5 rep range. This is going to be mainly strength and power for this rep range. As long as your intensity is high enough, that's what you're going to be getting. The weights are going to be heavier, but that's with strength. Now, if you're doing power, the weights are going to be a little bit lighter, and you're going to be moving them with a lot of speed and force. 6 to 12 rep range. So this is still going to be a good strength stimulus as long as that intensity is pretty high. But you're also going to be getting a little more time under tension. So you're going to start to creep in the bounds of hypertrophy and growing the muscle to a much greater degree. Now, also, like I said, that also depends on your time under tension, what your intensity is going to be. But in between this range, you're looking at a lot of strength and then also some of that hypertrophy stuff. The power is going to start to decrease due to that much higher rep range. Performing each rep with maximal effort and intensity is going to start to diminish a lot because you're just going to get fatigued. 12 plus rep range. This is going to be mostly that endurance aspect we're talking about. You're going to build the muscle's ability to handle loads and reps for much longer periods of time. They're going to be able to work for longer periods. At this point, strength adaptations are pretty much going to be useless unless you're just an absolute beginner or this is like a maximum rep burnout set. So you're not going to be able to do those maximum burnout sets, which we'll talk about a little bit as much as you can because they're just so taxing. To mention power, that's going to be pretty low at this point too as well. And then also with hypertrophy, that's going to be much lower too. But you can still get a good hypertrophic response depending on the intensity that you're going to be using in this rep range. So I wouldn't count that one out completely just yet. But like I said, generally speaking, this 12 plus rep range is going to be used for muscular endurance and building your muscles' capacity to work for long periods of time. So let's talk about the different types of sets you can utilize in the gym. First one's going to be burnout sets. And these are not necessarily necessary, but they are a fun tool to provide a good reward. So this is that idea that you're going to be going to failure. And what happens during this is as you go to failure, you're going to elicit more motor unit recruitment due to the muscle fibers just fatiguing out. And then to create and to finish these movements, the muscles are just going to recruit more motor units and it's going to get you a little bit more of that stimulus. But the downside of this is the recovery can be very high depending on the exercise you do a burnout set in. If you do a burnout set in like a back squat or a deadlift, your recovery is gonna increase a lot. You're gonna be tanked on that. As compared to like a burnout set on like a lateral raise or a bicep curl, recovery window for that is just much smaller and it's much more tangible to do those more often compared to like a burnout set on a squat, a bench press, or a deadlift. Next one we're going to talk about is supersets. Supersets are great for increasing the overall volume that you can do in a much shorter amount of time. Say you're kind of short on time, you got 30 minutes to go in the gym, you want to get a few exercises, you want to hit a push-pull day, something like that. This is whenever you say you're going to do dumbbell bench press and then follow it up with an inverted row. They're back to back, no rest in between, and you're working different muscle groups. So the fatigue that you're going to be experiencing is going to be a little bit lower as compared to doing the next one we're going to talk about, which is your giant sets. Giant sets are when you complete multiple different exercises for the same muscle group in a row. So say you want to hit some hamstrings, so you'll do like a barbell Romanian deadlift and some leg curls, Nordic curls, and then finish up on banded hip extensions. Now, all these ones are hitting the hamstrings, but they're all hitting them a little bit differently. This is what your giant set is. You're going to be hitting a muscle group for an extended period of time. Then you repeat those 4 exercises for another couple sets or something. And then by the end of it, your hamstrings are going to be pretty tore up. The good thing about giant sets is you can get a lot of work done in a small amount of time. So 15, 20 minutes in the gym, if you're trying to hit hamstrings, you run through this, with a lot of intensity, you're going to get the job done very quickly. Another type of your sets is your contrast training. Contrast training is whenever you use a heavier lift and couple that with like a body weight power movement. So for example, say you're wanting to elicit some more power and more motor units in the quadriceps. So what you're going to do is a heavy front squat, okay, for like sets of, 3 to 5 reps. All right, what you're doing is you're potentiating those motor units in the quadriceps to produce force. You're getting more motor units to produce force. Then you follow that up by what you would call a broad jump or a vertical jump or something, while you still kind of have that motor unit potentiation going on. So then the idea is when you get to the broad jumps, you've sort of primed all those motor units to activate and to produce force. So now you're getting more motor units to produce more force at a much faster rate on these body weight movements, and then you're increasing your force production overall. Next is our dynamic versus maximal effort. Dynamic's going to be using more of that lighter weight, and so you're going to be moving fast, hence dynamic. It's going to be moving quickly. And then your maximal effort's going to be more of that much higher load with low volume and much higher intensity, so the weights are going to be moving a little bit slower. So this is going to be considered, like I said, a maximal effort lift. This is going to be around that 70 to 100% mark, kind of like that strength. And that dynamic effort is going to be more in that power production in that lower percentage rep range, about that 40 to 70%. And then our last one we have is our time under tension. Time under tension is a fantastic tool for increasing your hypertrophy. All that really is needed is adequate intensity, somewhere in that like 5 to 8 RPE range. And what you're focusing on is keeping the muscle under more tension, hence the name, time under tension. So you're focusing on slowing down the movement and keeping the muscles working for much longer periods of time throughout the movement. This is going to be giving a good stimulus to the muscle that it needs to increase in size. Here you can see as I lower the weight, we're spending more time under tension on this set. If you were to do a set of 20, it's going to be much more tension as compared to doing a set of 20 that kind of look like these bicep curls. A little bit faster, a little less time under tension. Periodization. Very important thing to understand, and it's a great way to keep yourself motivated and keep yourself consistent in the gym. Without periodization, you tend to just kind of be shooting in the dark. You want to have a long-term goal that you could then create small short-term goals to work towards, so that way you can keep consistent and really hone in and optimize your training. Microcycle is your daily training session. This is what you're doing in the gym. Obviously, you're going to want to have a short-term goal, very small short-term goal of what you're trying to achieve during that session. Ideally, the short-term goal is going to lead to achievement of that long-term goal. The mesocycle is the weekly training plan. Like I said, use this to create a small short-term goal. What do you want to achieve this week with your training, and how are you going to utilize this week and its training to help achieve the much longer-term goal? Then you have macro cycle. This is the overall training cycle. Ideally, this is going to be maybe 6 to 12 weeks in length, and you're going to make this long-term goal, and that's what's going to drive this whole macro cycle. Whether that be you want to increase your power, you want to increase your strength, you want to increase your endurance, you want to increase your athletic performance. That's what's going to be the driving factor for each week and each training session, and optimizing the training each day to help achieve that long-term goal. So here's a quick example of linear periodization versus conjugate periodization. On the left-hand side, we have the linear. As you can see, don't get too caught up in, week 1, week 2, blah, blah, blah. The days don't really matter. What's going to matter is looking at the sets and reps. We have a very consistent 4 sets of 8 reps during week 1. And you can kind of see the reps decrease a little bit throughout the week. They're going to go down a little bit, which then would mean that your intensity is going to go up because less reps that you perform, the higher the weight can be. As compared to our conjugate on the right-hand side, day 1 of week 1, you're going to have that higher rep range of squats. And then day 4 in the same week, you're going to have that lower rep range of squats. So you're kind of alternating in the same week between those higher rep ranges and lower rep ranges, getting a different stimulus during each session. So which one works best? Personally, I've used both, and I've seen great results from both. So if you're trying to really hone in your skills on one aspect, so that being like strength, then I would focus more like on a linear periodization, because you're just going to be really focusing all your adaptations on that strength. The reps are going to be lower, and you're going to be giving your body that one stimulus. If you're looking for a lot like more athletic performance, increasing your endurance to some degree and power production as well, look to a conjugate that you can kind of alternate and get the best of both worlds during the same week. When it comes to exercise selection, I like to keep it very simple and stick to the basics, especially when it comes to a beginner. Getting good at the basics, those being squats, benches, deadlifts, rows, pushing aspects, all those things are going to be the base foundations to the rest of your lifting career. Which is why I always prefer the compound movements for strength training and just overall general longevity of life. So it's going to be a great overall body workout. A big squat is going to just work the whole body. It's going to give you a great stimulus. And then it's going to also elicit greater growth hormone and testosterone response, which will help you to build more muscle. Also, what you're going to get is a strength building in the large body movement. So getting a very strong squat and a deadlift will also help you in real life, because you're just going to be a much stronger person. The downside to some of those ones is there's a greater technical aspect to them to perform with absolute proficiency. So they're a little bit harder to perform and take a little bit of time to get the technique down. Although I prefer compound movements, isolation exercises are great as well, especially when performed with a very high intensity. They're going to be great for hitting specific muscle groups that's much harder to hit in those large compound movements. Things like the quads, biceps, calves, hamstrings, glutes. All very good for just hitting those specific muscle groups. The good thing about them is it's also less physically taxing. Doing them a higher intensity on those isolation exercises isn't going to tank your recovery as much as a high intensity compound barbell movement. As well as these isolation exercises are much easier to perform as a beginner. The technical aspects are not as high, and you don't need as much proficiency as you would with a compound barbell movement. Some downsides is you get that less growth hormone and testosterone response, but it's not going to be something that's going to prevent you from growing any muscle. Also, another downside is that it just takes longer to get the same stimulus and the same workout in those smaller isolation exercises as compared if you were going to do barbell movements. Say you only got 20 minutes, it'd be much more beneficial for you to go into the gym and perform just like 5 to 6 sets of barbell back squats as compared to like 5 to 6 sets of leg extensions. So we've talked about a lot today already. So just a couple reviews of what you're going to be wanting to perform when it comes to exercise selection is with power, you want to move fast, okay? Like we said, power is the product of force times velocity. Each movement you do, you want maximal force with as much speed as possible. This is great for what we call rate of force development. This is your muscle's ability to produce force at a very fast rate in a very short amount of time. And this is also very great for athletic ability. If you want to become explosive and you want to be faster on the court or the field or wherever that may be, power training is going to be key. Exercise selection for strength, it's going to be a little bit slower moving as compared to a power movement because the load's going to be higher. It's going to be more taxing as well. So you're going to be getting overall a greater force output. Your absolute force is going to be increasing. And I prefer large compound movements with strength because I feel you get the best bang for your buck, but it's not the only way you can go. So hypertrophy training is going to be mainly focused on increasing in muscle size. I like to slow down movements when it comes to hypertrophy so you get that time under tension. That's a very key aspect when it comes to hypertrophy is time under tension. If that's something you want to take away, time under tension is key with hypertrophy. Shouldn't have to repeat it again, but time under tension is key with hypertrophy. A beautiful thing with hypertrophy training too is that it actually looks like you lift. Building more muscle and getting bigger and increasing your muscular size, it's a great aesthetic, you know? Everybody wants to look big, everybody wants extra muscle, so that's a great thing about hypertrophy training when it comes to getting your exercise selection. And the best thing about hypertrophy too is you get the best of both worlds. You'll get a great mix of compound and isolation exercises that you can utilize to increase your muscular size. And don't forget the endurance training. Very, very important when it comes to increasing your ability for the muscle to work for long periods of time, especially in those longer, intense training sessions. So like I said, I generally recommend at the beginning of your cycle, starting in that higher rep range with longer sets and reps. This is going to build that base, that foundation for you to be able to perform for longer in the gym in the future. Also with endurance training, it's much less taxing on the body as compared to high intensity strength training. So you'll be able to get more volume and frequency in, especially during the beginning of those training cycles. Last, we're going to talk about creating your own program. Number one thing you must look for is what are your goals? Set your goals. If you don't have goals in the gym and increasing either strength, power, endurance, or just overall health, it's going to be hard to be consistent and it's going to be hard to optimize your training. So number one is to set your goals and really decide on what you want. And then the other one to also think about is how much time do you have in the gym? That's going to be a big proponent. If you don't have that much time, you're going to need those bigger body weight movements or those compound barbell movements to get you the most time in the gym and optimize it. And then also is access to equipment. Depending on how much equipment you have access to and what gym you're going to is going to be a very large dictator of what kind of exercises you're performing. Lastly is a example strength day for a lower extremity day. We got 4 exercises. We got a 5x5 barbell squat, 5x5 barbell Romanian deadlift, 5x5 glute bridge, and then a 5x5 calf raise. All these ones are going to hit different muscle groups to some degree, but it's also going to give you a great stimulus. All these are compound movements, and all these are going to, like we said, we're going to hit quads with the squats. We're going to hit the hamstrings and glutes with RDLs. We're going to specifically kind of hit the glutes with the glute bridge, and then with calf raises, we're going to hit the calves. And like I said, this is kind of that strength. So the 5 reps, that's going to be in that strength range, but also getting up toward that hypertrophy range. So you're also going to get a good stimulus from that as well. Calf raise is a little higher in that hypertrophy range, but like I said, it all depends on intensity. Intensity is key when it comes to an adequate strength stimulus. I know we went through a lot today, and that could be very overwhelming at times. But the thing that you have to understand is this is a lifelong process. And you're never going to create the perfect program. And it's always going to be a process of revisiting your programming and rewriting it and kind of figuring out how's this going to play with me? How's this going to play with me? So a little bit is, it's all going to change day to day. So don't get so caught up on the small, minute details and focus on a few key things. 1, intensity. Train intense. Train hard and train often. Consistency. That's the next thing you've got to keep in mind. And the third thing is just stick to something. Instead of changing things up all the time, focus on getting good at one thing. There's a saying that I love to tell people, and that is, if you chase 2 rabbits, you won't catch one. So when it comes to your training to optimize, take the time and focus on one aspect of it, whether that be the strength, power, or hypertrophy, or endurance. Spend the time and focus it all your efforts. So if all this seems pretty difficult and it seems like something you don't want to do for yourself, I do offer online coaching at different levels and specificity. One's very, very involved and one's kind of hands off, and I do offer pre-written programs as well. So please check that out on my website. Thank you for watching again. I appreciate the time that you have given me to watch my introduction to Principles of Strength Training. Please give me a follow on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and check out my website.